We're living through the golden age of actives in skincare. You know, the ingredients, the chemical compounds that are added to skincare that claim to create a specific measurable effect. Every serum promises one. Every beauty brand feels that they need one. And every corner of social media claims to have found the ingredient that will finally fix your skin. It's exciting, but it's also created a really strange blind spot in the beauty industry because we've become so obsessed with the next breakthrough that we've forgotten to ask a much simpler question, which is, what does our skin actually need? And most people don't realize how unusual this moment is. 20 years ago, beauty marketing didn't hinge on a list of actives. And now a skincare product barely feels legitimate unless it contains something with a trademark or a clinical study or a buzzword behind it. Actives have become shorthand for science, even when the product itself is not necessarily doing very much. And the irony is that in many cases, the humble building blocks of skincare themselves do far more of the heavy lifting than the actives that steal the spotlight. But of course, not all actives are created equal. Behind the scenes, ingredient manufacturers are running complex studies and thinking deeply about skin biology and trying to design ingredients that genuinely help people. It's painstaking work, and it raises questions that we don't hear often enough, such as how do actives actually get made? How do suppliers know what they really do on the skin? And how should formulators decide when an active is necessary and when it isn't? So today we're stripping back the noise and focusing on the science behind the actives boom. Not the trends, not the TikTok advice, but the real process of creating cosmetic ingredients that earn their space in a formulation. And to explore that, I'm joined by someone who spends her days thinking about skin biology and testing methods and how to translate the hard science into products that make a difference. You want to hear this, so let's get started. Welcome to Green Beauty Conversations, in which I challenge the beauty industry to become sustainable, champion independent and green beauty, and encourage you to join me in making beauty better. I'm your host, Lorraine Dallmeier. I'm a chartered environmentalist, biologist, and the CEO of award-winning online organic cosmetic formulation school, Formula Botanica. We have tens of thousands of students in over 190 countries around the world who study with us to become organic beauty formulators and entrepreneurs. Visit our website at formulabotanica.com to try our free online formulation course. And if you want to be the first person to know what's happening in green beauty, make sure you subscribe to this podcast in your favorite podcast app. So in today's episode, I'm joined by Dr Jule Lexa Völzke, who is a chemist with research experience in bioanalytics and now works as the manager of product design and development for the cosmetic active ingredient company CLR Berlin. Drawing on her scientific expertise, she collaborates closely with CLR's R&D departments to bridge the gap between consumer needs and the science of the skin, with the aim of developing effective skincare solutions. So CLR Berlin was founded in 1926. That means they are 100 years old this year, and they bring a century of expertise in fermentation and plant extracts, focusing on natural and effective active ingredients grounded in skin biology. Jule's work sits right at the heart of this approach, ensuring that each active is relevant, scientifically consistent, and designed to improve the well-being of the skin. Hi, Jule. How are you doing today?
Hi, good to see you, Lorraine. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for coming on the podcast. I think this is such an interesting topic. So let's start at the top. Can you please introduce CLR Berlin? What do you guys do?
Yeah, for sure. So CLR Berlin, we are an active ingredient supplier. Based in Berlin, we're privately owned, and we develop active ingredients for skin and hair care. And that's probably one of the main things that we develop, produce, and distribute all under one roof here in Berlin, which makes it really special. So from the small scale lab development to high scale production, we just have it here. And that's really nice. And the key expertise, I would say, for many, many years, is fermentation technology. So we work with postbiotic lysates, with different bacteria strains, have a lot of experience in that field, but also algae or plant extractions. So basically, it's always a complex mixture of natural ingredients. And we've been doing this almost for 100 years. So celebrating the anniversary in 2026, that's really special, yeah.
big party time next year.
That's true. Yeah, that's true.
Well, let's start by talking about what actives are, because I know it's a term that we use a lot in the cosmetics industry. We have functionals, we have actives, but what exactly are they?
Yeah, so it's just an ingredient in a formulation that is tested and has a proven efficacy, addressing a specific skin issue or skin condition. And it's validated. And in the end, you have something you can measure, but you can also notice. So the consumer has to notice a benefit from it. And we have to make sure that this is valid and this is scientifically proven. And I always like the analogy when you think of a well-cooked dish. You have a lot of ingredients, and you could say the active ingredient are the spices. You just really need really little of them to have impact and to give another layer or direction for the meal. And spices, they can be warming, cooling, refreshing. And that's the same thing with actives. They have an intended purpose in that formulation. And when it's done well, in the right dosage, you really have a good, unique composition.
That's such a lovely analogy. I'm never going to look at cooking in the same way again.
I'm sorry for that.
No, it's great. So I suppose a lot of people think about an active ingredient. I mean, most people only see it at the consumer end, right? When everyone's splashing all this news and TikToks about all these actives. And people imagine that they're born from this light bulb moment. But in reality, can you walk us through what has to happen behind the scenes before an idea about an active even has a chance of becoming an ingredient?
Yeah. I think the light bulb moment is always something you can hope for. It might happen. But you're right, it's much more complex. I think what we try to do here at CLR, we always have the consumer in mind. That's always the first starting point, you could say. But there are many approaches. I would say the main ones are you start with an interesting source. We are natural based, so we look at nature and then we see which species, which plant, which bacteria strain does something interesting, and does this property might help or be beneficial for skin. That would be the second question then. So for example, we have this microalgae in our active Cutigard that lives in hot volcanic springs in Iceland, and where other species simply die, this algae thrives. So why? What's the reason? What can it do? And can we use a technology we have here, like fermentation or extraction, to make use out of this and then test it on skin? Let's see what skin cells say. So this would be the one thing, starting with a nice source. And the other approach would be you have a specific skin topic you want to address. You know, I want an active targeting acne or sensitive skin. So which source could deliver that? Manuka might be a great idea for acne, or when you want to address barrier or skin health. There's a lot of scientific literature saying that postbiotics have an effect on these renewal processes. So which strain could do that? So it's vice versa, or it's from consumer to science back to consumer. And a lot of thought goes into that process, and time and efforts to finally see which active makes it.
That makes perfect sense. And it's obviously a long process. But all I was thinking as you were talking was, who went on holiday to Iceland and saw a volcano and thought, you know what, there might be something in there.
Maybe that was the light bulb moment, you know. So
Exactly. Yeah. So what kind of studies does an active have to go through before it can then come to market?
So first, when the idea is born or the source is clear and there's a stable product, then safety and toxicological tests are the first thing, of course, you have to do. It has to take all those safety boxes in order to proceed the whole development process. And then we do that in-house here as well. We have a cell biology department doing the in vitro cell testing and the first efficacy testing, you could say. And then it gets more and more complex. You can go to 3D models, ex vivo skin explants. Then when you have a nice valid base on data, then you can go into a clinical study and really test it on volunteers to see how the active performs in real life.
So some of our listeners might not know what some of those terms mean. Like you've mentioned in vitro, you mentioned ex vivo. Can you walk us through the basics?
For sure. So when we started the front, it's an in vitro testing always means that you take skin cells, you see how does these cells behave when we treat them with an active or when we stress them with UV and then treat with active. So it's a playground in a lab, you could say, to see do we have a mode of action. This is where we start testing, and it has to be designed, it has to be done well, it has to be reproducible, and then you can move on to further testings. And ex vivo would be, do you have really skin explants, so real skin or artificial skin in 3 dimensions, because that changes, from a 2D dimension, treating cells, seeing how it reacts, to a 3D dimension. It's closer to real skin. And of course, in the end, trying it in vivo or clinical study makes it really real.
So for our listeners then, we've got in vitro, which is, as you say, more in the lab, the sort of playground, as you called it. In vivo is the clinical study. Ex vivo is when you start to get really techie with the 3D skin models.
Exactly, yeah.
So what do people often misunderstand about those types of tests?
The complexity, I would say, because of course these are individual steps in the development process, but they have to be linked. And that is the challenge, to translate data you obtain in an in vitro to a clinical. That is something we are really keen on doing, making that bridge from these test systems. So it's all a coherent story for each active. And I think what can be a misunderstanding is that you test this in that kind of setting, in that dosage, in that environment, on these cells, and there you obtain these results. Of course, we want to make it as broad as we can, but in the end, it's proper science. And that's why we perform a lot of these tests, to make sure we have a lot of conditions ticked where we actually understand the active through and through.
Yeah, no, that makes perfect sense. I think a lot of people they think they can extrapolate from one to the other as well. But what you're explaining is it's very much a pathway where you have to take the active through all the different types of stages. What are some of the common reasons that an active doesn't make it to market?
I think the first things that come to my mind are pretty simple, like finding a good source, a stable supply chain. Then when I have the source, I have all the sustainability factors checked. Is it stable? Can we make a stable active out of this natural ingredient? And when all of these boxes are ticked, then is there efficacy? Does it perform? Sometimes in the last stages, you realize it might not do it to that extent that we thought. We have to change the whole technology. So it's a really long process, and it feels like a little miracle when an active has it all, So, it's a lot of work and a lot of people putting their efforts in there, for sure.
That makes sense. So we talked about what it's like on your side of the lab bench, preparing the actives. Let's think about the people using the actives. Either want people formulating, there are a lot of formulators listening to this podcast, or maybe someone looking to purchase a beauty product that contains a simple active. What's the easiest way to decide whether someone needs an active at all?
I think when you see it from a formulator perspective, it's pretty straightforward. It's like problem, solution. Which problem do you want to address, and which active can give you the solution? And that's desk research and finding the perfect match. Each active has something to offer. Another has something else. It's a pick and mix and match. Try to see what fits your formulation idea or your product idea. So that's more from the professional view. As a consumer, I would always say, get to know your skin type first. Think about your individual skin. This is personal. This is not something you can read somewhere. It's something you have to find out for yourself. And then when you know your skin type, know your skin condition within that skin type, because that changes. That can be seasonal. That has so many different aspects that influence your skin condition. And that might change in winter to summer. What does my skin need now? Do I need hydration? Do I need protection? Do I need whatever it is? Just ask yourself the question, what might be missing.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned hydration there, and hydration alone can often solve a surprising number of skin issues, actually. Why do you think that message gets lost in the noise? Because the noise is all about the sexy actives out there on the internet.
Yeah, that's a good question, because there's a lot there. I think moisturization is such a basic need. It's everywhere. And I think it's one of the most used claims, like hydration, moisturization. It's like something that everyone expects. You can't go without. And maybe that's why it's underrated in the sense of we just need it. It must be there. But in the end, when you think about hydration more deeply, it actually, when you have hydrated skin, this means you have a really good barrier. And this means you have a good skin condition. So you could say hydration is a successful endpoint of a good quality skin. And when the balance of your skin tips, probably hydration is one of the first attributes it might lose. So it's massively important, as you say, and maybe because it's that simple and that basic, you can't compete with active B and C and D. But it's massively important, and we kind of always have hydration in the back of our heads.
Yeah, perhaps you're right. Perhaps people just expect that as the minimum. That's the baseline. And then we're looking at everything above that in terms of the actives. Have you ever seen any sort of humble ingredients outperform the sexier actives?
Yeah, of course. We had a chat about this. Like, they are really easy easy to formulate ingredients like glycerin, betaine that do a fantastic job with retaining moisture in your skin. And these humectants, they can bind water massively. It always depends what you're going for with your formulation. What is your goal, and how can you use your toolbox to create that experience? And in the end, of course, when you do the clinical testing and you have a nice data set proving hydration, you also want that the consumer standing in the bathroom using a product feels the effect without knowing anything about the product. And their humble ingredient, maybe combined with an active, does the job, but it really depends. It's an individual decision each time, I would say.
Yeah, good advice. Moving on slightly with the conversation, you're working in research and development, you're working with chemistry and biology. And do you ever come up against marketing departments who then take the information that you've given them and they basically start to create all sorts of claims? I guess where I'm going with this is, how do you create a good product story that's grounded in science and research and biology rather than just marketing gloss?
Yeah, that is a really good and really valid question, because I always say it's so hard to print an in vitro study to a product. It is, it's so,
true.
And that's always the main challenge. But what we try at CLR, really go through all these stages I've mentioned earlier, that we know our actives in and out. We know what they do. We do a lot of in vitro testing, and then the active has body, and we know how to work with the active. And then you can, when you start with that, a huge set of data and huge knowledge about the active, you can then simplify again. But still you have the body, you still know what it does. And then you end up with just words and claims and something that people can actually work with, because they will not work with an Excel sheet of data. And it's our job to do that in a reliable and honest and good way, so we can deliver the same information in different kind of communication systems. But still, it's always the same active. It's always the same mode of action. We just call it differently. And that's a huge challenge, but that's a nice challenge. The more you know about the active, the easier it gets to simplify in the end again, I would say. Yeah.
Where do you see formulators and marketers most often talk past each other? What's the sort of biggest sticking point?
Yeah, probably when you come from that scientific perspective, you're fascinated by the science alone. You're happy already when you know there's a good active, and that's okay. But I see that of course you need another layer of emotion, of relevance. It has to work in real life. apart from the scientific aspects and bringing that to one product from all of these perspectives. And they are all right. They're all valid. That's the challenge. And of course, when it comes to communication, there always can be issues. That's normal as well. But that makes something really special when you get it done in a good way, because then it has all of these aspects. It is scientifically proven, but it might still be emotional and attention grabbing and something colorful.
Is it possible to extrapolate the function of the active into the overall product? Because that's the type of claim that people, I think, probably often want to make for their beauty products, but they can't legally make it, can they?
I think what helps there to overcome this problem is what we try in our in vivo studies. Of course, we do like measurements. We use a lot of instrumentation technologies like corneometry, sebometry, colorimetry, standardized photography, all of these technologies to create data, but then not stopping there, adding the human layer with expert grading, self-grading, asking the volunteers, how does it feel? What do you see? Do you see change? Do you like this? Speaking to people, asking them, and then you can generate claims that are based on data, but they are also based on humans. And then you can make that claim in a different way. For example, what I've mentioned with Cutiguard, our active, which is that algae, it deals a lot with skin tone evenness and radiance and glow. Radiance and glow per se is a hard claim to get when it comes to data. How do you define or quantify radiance? That is not that easy to do. And so we've asked makeup artists, expert graders that care about skin tone evenness and the glowy finish. And when we showed them standardized photography and asked them to rank, then we can make other claims than just with simple data. And I think that will evolve, like the combination from these technologies, then surveys asking the volunteers, and also like AI-based technologies, ranking results or before and after results. So combining everything, really everything, and then you can generate claims that are meaningful.
Yeah, good advice. So what mistakes do you see brands make when they try and lead with a trendy ingredient instead?
That's probably what I've mentioned. Like when it has body, the story is already there. You just have to tell it. It will come on its own. And that is probably why it takes a lot of time to develop an active ingredient, because you already thought about it 2 to 3 years. And this is the story. And this is the only thing you have to do is then communicate it well. Everyone will notice an active that has that.
CLR Berlin doesn't seem to jump on the trend bandwagon quite so much. So how do you guys hold your ground when the market is obsessed with whatever TikTok is shouting about that week?
I think that's fascinating because, of course, we notice the trends. And of course, I think it's really important to meet people where they are at the moment. And I see when a trend provokes that, people engage with a topic more intensely, let it be microbiome or longevity or barrier balance. When it means that a specific topic is highlighted, then it's just a chance to talk about it in more detail. But that is not what drives us in the development process. What drives us is skin biology and understanding the basics. And this always feels fascinating and new because it's endless. It's endless, and this fuels our stories, and then we can try to adapt to the current trends. And this can mean that there's a trend and maybe we have an active that was developed 20 years ago that feeds the trend because it's science. And I would say skin biology is a timeless task.
It is. And to be fair, a lot of the trends that come up, you look at them and you go, Rosemary's been, we've been using that in cosmetics for thousands of years. How is that a trend?
Yeah, that's so true. That's what I mean. It's sometimes just the new perspective or the new light you see on things, but they've always been there.
Yeah, that's very true, actually. Would you love formulators to focus on more when they're thinking about active ingredients?
I've seen that recently there's a lot of going on when it comes to those sensory experiences. I really encourage that focus, that the moment where someone applies a product, it has to be a good experience and something comforting and emotional. And I would say that we as an active ingredient supplier, we hugely rely on a good formulation, because when the formulation is good, the consumer will keep on using the product. It will be easy to keep it up. And most actives, they really need time to perform. So it goes hand in hand, and it has to be a good experience, making the formulations, like I said, like a good dish, a good meal, carrying the active in a smart and genuine way. It goes hand in hand. And like everything in nature or in life, it takes time.
Yes.
The better the formulation, higher chances are that the active actually can be beneficial for the skin.
Yeah. That doesn't entirely relate to the expectation of the beauty consumer who wants to erase their wrinkles overnight, but you're right.
I'm sorry.
Indeed.
Yeah.
Can you talk me through briefly at a very high level what sort of actives you guys make and sell at CLR Berlin?
Yeah, I think our classics and what we really started in the 60s are the postbiotic lysates. So we have a lot of bacteria strains, and then we use the fermentation technology to make these bacteria adapt to the condition. So this is a really like tuned process where we know what we want to do with these bacteria strains in order to get these metabolites that are interesting. So this is a huge part. And we also have what you said, humble ingredients like the daisy flower.
Yeah.
You probably pass by when we're walking down the streets. This could be a really good active ingredient for radiance and glow.
Yeah.
So we have that. It's evolving. We always look for new ideas and new inspiration. This is probably the best part, that it's all in front of us and we just have to open our eyes.
Do you guys work with indie beauty brands as well?
We distribute globally. So from small brands to really multinationals. So I think that's another great thing about CLR as well, that we really try to make it as broad and as open to every kind of brand that is interested in working with our actives.
Amazing. So, Jule, thank you so much for coming on the podcast and talking to me about actives today. Really interesting topic. Where can people find out more about CLR Berlin? How can they get in touch? How can they follow you? How does it all work?
Yeah, we have our website. It's clrberlin.com, and we're on LinkedIn, Instagram, Facebook. You will find us, that's for sure.
Amazing.
It was a pleasure to speak to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you. We will include all of those links in the show notes below, so you can go and click and have a look at CLR Berlin. Thank you so much for joining me today, Jule. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye-bye.
I would love to hear your thoughts on this episode. How important do you think actives are in your beauty products? Have you ever bought a product that doesn't contain one? Which ones do you look for? Come and tell us. Leave us a comment on our social channels, as both the Formula Botanica team and I love hearing from you. And if you want to hear some more episodes about some of the topics we discussed today, please do delve back into the podcast archives. Some great examples include episode 295, in which I interviewed Charlotte Julien and looked at whether vitamin C's days in skincare could be numbered soon. Vitamin C is, of course, a very popular high-performance ingredient that dominates the skincare shelves. Or episode 286, in which I put forward my thoughts on why some ingredients take decades to go mainstream when others dominate the narrative. There is a wealth of information in our old episodes, and I do encourage you to go back and listen to them. Thank you for joining Jule and I for this latest episode of Green Beauty Conversations. I hope you enjoyed it. And if you did, please do leave us a 5-star review so that other people can enjoy these conversations too. Make sure you subscribe to the podcast on Apple Podcasts or Spotify or whatever your favorite podcast app is, and stay tuned for the next episode. Follow Formula Botanica at Formula Botanica on Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, TikTok, Pinterest, LinkedIn. We're everywhere. And come and give me a follow at Lorraine Dallmeier on Instagram and LinkedIn. Visit our website at formulabotanica.com and sign up for our free online formulation course today.